Lord Lieutenants, Deputy Lieutenant, Chief Executive, Directors, Councillors, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and welcome to the Midlands Armed Forces Covenant and Veterans Covenant Healthcare Alliance. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning, and all the more remarkable given what is going on. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Guy Benson and my background includes a full career in the armed forces as a soldier in the British Army. For the past 2 years, I've been employed as a special advisor to the leader and chief executive of Wiltshire Council. More importantly, for the last 3 months, I've been employed by the RNOH by Tim Briggs, Professor Tim Briggs. Before I hand over to our keynote speaker, I'd just like some housekeeping rules. Firstly, we are on a Zoom platform, so there are nuances associated with that. We believe we've got about 112 participants. Can I ask everybody, please, to mute their computers or laptops and also turn off your cameras so that the only people you will see will be the speakers. Can I ask people to keep chat to an absolute minimum? By all means, however, do place questions in the chat box and they will be answered as the team go along. Time is tight, so we may not get time at the end of the webinar for a questions session. Can I ask all speakers to turn off their mobile phones or to rumble mode? And finally, the event will be recorded. And for those of you who are social media savvy, we're using the hashtags AFC, hashtag VCHA, hashtag wrong at WM RFCA. So please do use them. Next slide, please, Carl. Right, the aim of the meeting is really quite simple. It's to raise awareness of both the Armed Forces Covenant and the Veterans Covenant Healthcare Alliance. They are inextricably linked. It is worth noting also that we have a broad range of our participants on the webinar, and therefore I have to cover both left and right of arc in terms of individual journeys. I hope you enjoy the webinar. Next slide, please. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to an inspirational woman, Mrs. Sylvia Parkin, MBE, TD, JP, DL. Her background is absolutely extraordinary. She has 2 master's degrees. She's been employed by the Ministry of Defence as a campaign director for supporting Britain's Reserve Forces. She was a territorial army nurse and deployed twice operationally to Gulf Wars 1 and 2. So she has first-hand experience. She's also a magistrate and a chair on both the Wolverhampton Bench and Family Panel. She was appointed Deputy Lieutenant for West Midlands in 2009 and honoured by Her Majesty the Queen in the Diamond Jubilee New Year's Honour List, being awarded the MBE for services to the Ministry of the Defence and Armed Forces. More recently, however, Sylvia has been seized by the VCHA initiative, and together we are hoping to really drive through this change in terms of the Midlands. And finally, she's not busy enough, she's just volunteered to work in a school conducting COVID-19 lateral flow testing for pupils so that schools can remain open. Sylvia, over to you, please.
Thank you, Guy. Lord Lieutenants, Deputy Lieutenants, Chief Executives, Directors, Councillors, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to the virtual Midlands Armed Forces Covenant and Veterans Covenant Healthcare Alliance webinar, which I shall be referring to as the VCHA for the remainder of my introduction. It's really good to see such a strong attendance from so many people who share a passion for our military community. And I know there are many old friends and colleagues out there who are participating in today's event who have been supporters of the Armed Forces Covenant for many years. And it's a real pleasure to welcome you today. Today is all about our common aim, to ensure that we continue to raise the awareness, understanding and credibility of the Covenant, while at the same time reinforcing that under the VCHA we can improve armed forces and veteran care whilst raising NHS standards for all. This year, our armed forces have stepped forward to support our nation through the COVID-19 pandemic. from constructing NHS Nightingale hospitals to delivering testing in our communities. Our veterans have all been at the heart of the voluntary effort in many communities. As a result of this, the Armed Forces Covenant, and indeed the VCHA, has never been more vital. Partners across the UK in the public, private and charitable sectors have continued to support those who serve or have served and their families. As we know, there is already excellent work going on across the Midlands region, building strong relationships between local authorities, the NHS, the military and military charities. But as we will hear today, through further partnerships, collaboration and coordination, so much more is possible. I'm very conscious that some of our trusts here in the Midlands, who have already signed up to the Armed Forces Covenant, are members of the Employer Recognition Scheme and have signed up to Step Into Health and are already Veteran Covenant Healthcare Alliance accredited. However, there will be some that are not. So my first challenge to you all today is to work together to make our region the best place for patient care for our armed forces community. Today offers a chance to make a substantial difference for the military community and a real difference to those with the greatest needs. This is our opportunity to improve our delivery of the Armed Forces Covenant alongside the VCHA and make it all a reality. This will make a positive contribution to the lives of service people, our veterans and their families who continue to support us and our nation so selflessly. I will now hand you over to Colonel Guy, who will manage the programme for the next hour or so. But do please engage via the chat line if you wish, and have a great morning. Thank you, Guy.
I'll copy you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Lieutenant. Next slide, please, Carl. And I remind everyone to mute, please. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sylvia, for that inspiring opening address, and hopefully that sets the tone for the next hour. I wanted to just quickly provide an overview of the programme, not too much detail. Next slide, please, Carl. Please don't sweat the detail on that, but in broad terms, the journey is a bit on Armed Forces Covenant and Employer Recognition Scheme. 202 Midlands Field Hospital, a reserve medical unit in our patch. The Veterans Covenant Healthcare Alliance, we've got the chair of that. And of course, we've also got a hospital, Coventry and Warwickshire Partnership Trust, who will deliver their journey to VCHA accreditation. And maybe more importantly, we've got a veteran who will give that lived experience. And ultimately, that is exactly where the rubber hits the road. Next slide, please. There's an awful lot to get through this morning, so without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to West Midlands RFCA. As way of an introduction, Colonel Richard Maybury, QGM, is the Chief Exec of RFCA and has had an exceptional career. The first thing I'd say is that he's an ammunition technical officer or bomb disposal officer. He's commanded the EOD squadron, the EOD regiment, and was commandant of the EOD school. And his last regular job was as Deputy Commander 11 Signal Brigade. He has seen service in Northern Ireland, the Balkans, Iraq, Kuwait and Afghanistan. He has a helper as well, Bobby Birdie. He studied at Nottingham University and graduated with a bachelor's degree in operations management in 2000. In his last role, Bobby worked as a skills engagement manager and directly involved in the marketing and successful delivery of over 1,000 courses, generating over 10 million in adult funding within the West Midlands. He is currently the Regional Employer Engagement Director for the West Midlands Reserve Forces Cadet Association. Next slide, over to the Chief Exec, please.
Well, Guy, thank you very much. Lord Lieutenants, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning, everybody. Delighted to be here this morning and really pleased that we're able to support this event and the Veterans Covenant Healthcare Alliance in particular. It's a great initiative and a real demonstration of commitment from those that have signed up to it and that are intending to sign up to it. What I'd like to do this morning is just to give you a quick overview of the West Midland Reserve Forces and Cadets Association before handing over to one of my colleagues, Bobby Birdie, who'll spend a few minutes talking about the Armed Forces Covenant in particular, which is very much linked to the VCHA initiative, as Guy's already highlighted. So the West Midland RFCA, our headquarters is at Harble in Birmingham. We're one of 13 regional RFCAs covering the whole of the UK. We're funded by the Ministry of Defence and the 3 single services to support principally the reserves and the cadets. And in that regard, we've got 4 key roles. First of all, we provide advice to the military chains of command for us in the West Midlands region on the reserves and cadets. Secondly, we manage all of the reserve and cadet estates across the West Midlands. So that's about 400 buildings across some 170 sites. We support the MOD's Youth and Cadet Programme. That involves support to the Sea Cadets, the Army Cadets, the Air Cadets, and the school-based combined cadet forces as well. And about half of my 60 staff provide the full-time professional staff for the 4 county-based Army Cadet forces in the West Midlands. And those full-time staff provide all the logistic and admin support for those county cadet forces, which allows the volunteers, the Cadet Force adult volunteers, to get on with delivering training for the cadets and to concentrate on that. And then finally, our 4th key role is essentially what we're doing this morning, and that is that we conduct engagement, and we're fully resourced to do that. Principally, our engagement is with employers, where we advocate in particular for the reserves and the cadets. And essentially what we're seeking to do there is to persuade employers of the benefits of supporting their employees into the reserves and the cadets. And of course, seeking to persuade them of the benefits of employing veterans in particular as well. We also advocate, as well as the reserves and the cadets, we also advocate for the wider Armed Forces family. That includes serving personnel, their spouses and their families, and of course the veteran community. The engagement that we conduct is seen by the Ministry of Defence as particularly important because it supports the MOD efforts to improve the connection between defence and society. And in that regard, the volunteer membership of our association is particularly important. We've got some 170 association members in the West Midlands, and they comprise both serving and ex-serving regulars, reserves, and Cadet Force adult volunteers. But in addition to that, we've got members from many other walks of life too, from employers and employer organisations like Chambers of Commerce, for example, from the education sector, from local authorities, and from community groups. And effectively, our volunteer membership gives us access to a huge network of networks across the West Midlands, which enables us to reach out far and wide. Now, much of the basis of our engagement is the Armed Forces Covenant, which for us is a really useful tool, but also a very meaningful entity. It's enshrined in law, and it's an agreement between the nation and its armed forces. And I'm going to hand over now to one of our regional employer engagement directors, Bobby Birdie, who'll explain a little bit more about the Armed Forces Covenant.
Thank you, sir. And thank you everyone for joining us today. It's always an honour to be able to speak about the Armed Forces Covenant. I hope these words do some justice to the subject matter. So my name's Bobby. I also represent Defence Relationship Management at the Defence Relationship Management team at the Ministry of Defence. We're responsible for the administration of the Armed Forces Covenant and also the employer recognition scheme. We're set up to be a single point of contact for businesses in relation to defence people issues and initiatives. So this presentation will cover what the Armed Forces Covenant is, how it relates to business, and how employers can benefit from signing the covenant. Next slide, please. So the Armed Forces Covenant, as has been said, is a promise from the nation that those who serve or who have served in the armed forces and their families are treated fairly and not disadvantaged in their day-to-day lives. The Armed Forces Covenant is a term that was introduced to refer to the mutual obligations between the UK and Her Majesty's Armed Forces. It's an informal understanding. The key principles are that the armed forces community should face no disadvantage compared to other citizens, and that special consideration is appropriate in some cases, especially for the injured and the bereaved. Some 150 men and women stand ready to defend our nation and to take on military challenges to help maintain peace, safe seas and safe skies. And proudly, I can say that we now have 6,700 employers who have signed up to the Armed Forces Covenant, and thereby creating pledges of support for our Armed Forces community. The numbers are growing by about 25 new Armed Forces Covenants every week, and that's all thanks to your support. Next slide, please. So I'll talk in brief about the Armed Forces community. These are the men and women we ask you to consider when signing your Armed Forces Covenant. So, of course, members of the regular Royal Navy, Royal Marines, Army and Royal Air Force. Every year, around 14,000 individuals leave the Armed Forces. They're of widely different ages and have a range of qualifications and experiences. Everyone who leaves will have personal circumstances and aspirations, but the adjustment from the military environment into the civilian world is an issue that's common to all. So members of the reserve forces, the reserves play a crucial role in national security and are critical to operational capability. They make up around 20% of our total people strength. Veterans, so according to the Career Transition Partnership, around 85% of veterans successfully transition into civilian employment within 6 months of leaving the forces. There may still be support issues around resettlement, family adjustment, mental and physical health, obviously that employer practices can help with. The Cadet Force of Adult Volunteers, those who give up their time to look after our cadet forces. Joining the cadets offers a range of benefits to individuals and young people and the wider community, and this wouldn't happen without the good voluntary work of our cadet force instructors and staff. And the spouses and partners of all of the above. So military spouses have to deal with drastic changes based on operational requirements, supporting their partner's deployment, looking after children, putting their own careers on hold, and potentially having to deal with injury and sickness. For business, this is a possibly an untapped talent pool with a dedicated free recruitment agency called Forces Families Jobs, working with businesses to create employee pathways. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for business? So we would encourage all employers to sign up to the Armed Forces Covenant. Most of our NHS trusts in the region have now, and hopefully we can encourage all NHS trusts to sign, as well as GP surgeries, pharmacies, your supply chain partners and networks. All employers we'd like to have signed up to the Armed Forces Covenant. In doing so, what this does is it allows your business to support the Armed Forces community in a single document, and that forms then the foundation for a mutually beneficial partnership with Defence. Next slide, please. So the next slide will show a copy of the Armed Forces Covenant. If you've not seen it, it's a wonderfully elegant document. You'll see the third page, section 2. You can read that slightly. This is where organisations can create individual pledges of support, such as the recruitment of service leavers, veterans and military spouses, supporting your existing staff or future staff who are or may wish to become part of the reserve forces or join as a Cadet Force Adult Volunteer. Celebrating Armed Forces Day, working in partnership with local reserve units, and generally creating supportive policies to create parity for our Armed Forces community. Next slide, please. So there's many benefits to working with Defence. I was privileged to be at the Armed Forces Covenant signing for University Hospitals Birmingham in 2019. And I remember the Chief Executive, Dr. David Rosser, said it succinctly when he was signing the Covenant, saying that, the signing of the Armed Forces Covenant is a no-brainer, which I thought was perfect. The benefits are many, particularly in the recruitment of valuable military skills and experiences, the crossover of skills between a reservist's military and civilian employment, and in staff personal development opportunities, staff retention, and general overall job recognition. I won't go through all the details here, but I'd be delighted to have the conversations offline. Next slide, please. Just a quick word on the Defence Employee Recognition Scheme. So Defence is very, very keen to ensure that the most supportive organisations are appropriately recognised. It's now in its 8th year. The ERS seeks to recognise those employers who support defence people objectives and encourage others to exhibit the same behaviours. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank our partners in the West Midlands who have received gold and silver awards and who continue to advocate for the Covenant and find new ways to spread the word. You can see there the numbers of bronze, silver and gold award winners nationally. Next slide, please. This is all from me. I'd just like to thank everyone again, and especially our amazing NHS points of contacts who helped so much in generating awareness, pushing through supportive policies and giving up their already scarce time to help us spread the word. To those who proudly protect our nation, for those who do so with honour, courage and commitment, the Armed Forces Covenant is the nation's commitment to you. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Bobby and Richard, the Chief Exec of West Midlands Reserve Force and Cadet Association. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. Our next presentation is brought to you by 202 Midlands Field Hospital, a reserve unit based in Birmingham. The Field Hospital is commanded by Colonel John Bell, who initially joined the Territorial Army, now the Army Reserve, in 1995 and served with 205 Scottish Field Hospital as a combat medical technician and nursing officer. Leaving a clinical career in the NHS as an emergency care nurse, he commissioned into the regular army in 2002. His military experience saw him develop as a nurse practitioner. His experience has been enhanced through operational deployments to Northern Ireland, Iraq and Afghanistan, where he served in both clinical and staff appointments. His helper is Captain Paul Blanchard, who joined the army in 1978 as a tank soldier with the Queen's Royal Irish Hussars. He commissioned in 2008 and in 2009 he joined 202 Midlands Field Hospital, where he has completed a number of challenging appointments. His total military career to date is 43 years. Over to 202 Field Hospital. Next slide, please, Carl.
Thank you, Guy. Lord Lieutenants, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, firstly, let me say it's a real pleasure to join the team here in the Midlands. And thank you, Guy, especially for that introduction. Next slide, please. 202 Midlands Field Hospital is one of 10 reserve field hospitals located across the country, including Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. I have 200 officers and soldiers on strength here in the Midlands Field Hospital. Those doctors, nurses, paramedics and allied health professionals, some 50% of whom work inside the healthcare sector. Of the 19 trusts in our area, I have personnel serving in 14 of them. And that includes ambulance service personnel who are a key asset for us. Next slide, please. Before I hand over to Captain Paul Blanchard, my ops officer, for some detail on our reserve service, let me say a huge thank you for looking after our people, those serving and our veterans. This year, greater than any other year, has shown what we can achieve together. And I look forward, in my position here as the CEO of 202 Field Hospital, to working with you in the months coming forward to maintain that relationship, to build and develop those bonds. Thank you very much. Paul, over to you.
Thank you, Colonel. Lord Lieutenants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm Captain Paul Blanchard and I'm the Operations Support Officer for 202 Field Hospital. I intend to give you a short overview of my key roles and then highlight some of the benefits of Army Reserve service. In my role, two of my key outputs are recruiting and employer support and engagement, both of which are essential to our success. Dealing first with recruiting within the Army Medical Services Reserve, we do not have the capability to train doctors, nurses and allied health professionals. We rely upon recruiting people who are already trained with those key skills and who are clinically current. In my recruiting role, I look to identify opportunities to engage with personnel holding the key skills that we need. Examples of these activities are engagement with an NHS trust to gain access to their staff, who I would say are normally very helpful and compliant, and attendance at local and national conferences. The key skills that we are looking to recruit include consultants in emergency medicine, trauma and orthopedics, general surgeons and anaesthetics, nurses who are skilled in ITU and CCU, intensive care units, theatres, emergency department nurses and general nurses, and allied health professionals who are skilled as operational department practitioners, pharmacy technicians and biomedical scientists. That is not a full list, but it gives you a flavour of the things that we are looking for. In my second role as the Employer Support Officer, I act as the conduit between the Army Reserve and the employers of our staff. Employer Support Officers work with employers to provide support and assistance with regards to their employees who are serving within the Reserve. For example, we provide annually a 12-month training programme highlighting the key training dates, thus enabling HR departments and line managers to be able to plan well ahead. When a reservist mobilises in support of operations, we will provide advice and guidance to employers. This may include things such as signposting employers to Army agencies that deal with things like financial support or objections to deployment. It may not always be convenient to lose a key member of staff on deployment at any given time. And then at the end of deployment, the reinstatement of the reservists back into their employment. On the slide now, you can see some of the benefits, a slide named benefits. Whilst I think it is well understood that the Army Reserve Service provides benefits to the reservist itself through training and personal development, what is maybe less well understood are some of the benefits to employers through transferable skills. On the screen, you can see a number of benefits, and I would like to highlight just two of these for today, which is leadership and networking. Effective leadership is a key tool to success within all organisations. The Army Reserve is no different. Accordingly, we have a through-career process of command leadership and management training that is delivered in line with the career development of the soldier or officer. It starts at the lowest rank and continues throughout a reservist career. In fact, last week, to highlight this, the Army held its leadership conference online, and it was a great success. The other area I wish to look at is networking. As the commanding officer alluded to, we currently have staff working within 14 trusts in this area. This provides excellent networking opportunities for our staff. It enables them to meet with others from their speciality, identify best practice and new ideas, and wherever appropriate, bring them back to their own place to generate improvement. Next slide, please. Finally, I would just highlight the four locations that we are found at throughout the Midlands. We have base locations in Stoke-on-Trent, Shrewsbury, Birmingham, and Abingdon. At the bottom of the slide is my email address. If I can be of any assistance with anything that I've highlighted today, please do not hesitate to contact me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much to the commanding officer and Rosso of 202 Midlands Field Hospital. Great overview. Next slide, please. I'd like now really to hand you over to my boss, Professor Tim Briggs, CBE. Tim was appointed to the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital as a consultant in 1992. He was medical director at the RNOH for 15 years, ensuring a rebuild, and was president of the British Orthopaedic Association in 2014. He was appointed as a national director for clinical equality and efficiency for the NHS in September 2015, and he's been asked to lead and roll out the Get It Right First Time methodology developed in orthopaedics across all surgical and medical specialities with the provider network. In January 2019, he was made National Director of the Clinical Improvement for NHS. Additionally, he is the chair of VCHA and was the author of the Chavez Report. More of that later. Professor Tim Briggs was made Commander of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire in the 2018 New Year's Honours List for services to the surgical profession. Tim Briggs is a force multiplier, and he is passionate about the military. So without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to my boss. Tim, over to you. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Guy, for that very kind introduction. And Lord Lieutenant, colleagues and ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to be able to speak today. Can I have the next slide, please, Carl? So I'm a clinician. I'm a frontline surgeon at the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital, where I've been a consultant for 29 years. And I've been working in the NHS for over 37 years now. And I've been privileged in that time to treat both a huge number of NHS patients, but also armed forces personnel who are serving and veterans. And it was with this that I thought that the ones I was seeing when we started this program, that I thought we could do things a bit better. And for me, I'm absolutely passionate about it, because although I have never served, all my father served, my uncle served, and we have a duty of care to these individuals who sign up, put themselves in harm's way to defend our nation. And I think, therefore, we have an absolute moral obligation to make sure we provide them with the absolutely best care that we can. Next slide, please, Carl. So veterans in the NHS, we already know that they've got needs. They've got an older profile, and we know they have certain conditions that are greater than the rest of the normal non-serving population. We know there are challenges when they transfer and how they access GPs and hospitals, but we also know there are opportunities out there, because there are already some fantastic beacons of best practice in the NHS. And what we've got to do is really identify those and absolutely cascade those out into the wider NHS. Next slide, please, Carl. So if you look at the overall health of veterans, it's actually very similar to other members of society, except there are some significant differences, especially in long-term conditions around MSK, musculoskeletal, cardiovascular, respiratory, and mental health. Next slide, please, Carl. Now, where this all came from was a report that I wrote in 2011-12 about getting it right first time, where we could improve care for our patients, all NHS patients, if we did things in a different way. And on the back of that, I felt we could do the same for veterans. And that's what drove me really to write the Shavas report. And that's where the VCH really sprang from. Next slide, please. So the GIRT program, which is now across 41 specialties, starting orthopedics, because I'm an orthopedic surgeon. It's a national clinical-led program, and the idea is to improve outcomes, reducing unwarranted variation and complications, and it has been hugely successful. And what we were able to do with the data, we went to visit every trust and talk through their practice and their outcomes. We were able to identify trusts that had excellent orthopedic outcomes, and also identify trusts wanting to improve veterans' care, because I asked every trust I went to what they were doing regarding the veterans' care, and trying to exemplar the ones that are doing well and encourage others that this is something we needed to do. Next one, please. So on the back of that, this was about identifying the problems facing the armed forces and about veterans and the NHS, and proposing solutions. And I think the report which we published in 2014 was very well received. And the Shavas name is a very famous name in the military, and the Shavas family have been absolutely totally behind what we've been trying to do. And within the report is the letter I received from the family about how Noel would be absolutely delighted to support this sort of this sort of methodology that we're doing. And what I want to do is enshrine the Armed Forces Covenant, and there's no doubt that's moved forward massively. I wanted to improve care and rehabilitation and learn from what was Headley Court and now Stamford Hall, and how we made sure that those serving on, and then soldiers or airmen or naval personnel, once they were discharged into the NHS, we maintained that sort of rehabilitation services to maintain their ability to live normal lives. How we transfer learning between the Defence Medical Services and the NHS. And I wanted to establish a network of provider trusts who understood what veterans needed and actually could provide that exemplar service that I wanted to do. Now, it did focus on MSK conditions, but there's no doubt that many of these findings would apply more widely. Next slide, please. So this is what we wanted. So the purpose is there for you all to see: develop, share and drive implementation of best practice. It's an absolute no-brainer really, and just common sense. And we know that if we improve it for veterans, that'll cascade into the wider NHS, because remember, all veterans are NHS patients at all as well. Next one, please. So our patron is Lord Dannett, who I've known a number of years. He was always supportive of this, and he's now our patron, and his support has been very important as we move this forward and actually drive forward to make sure that all trusts become members of the VCHA. Next one, please. We've also built support across health and defence. Certainly Jeremy Hunt, the previous Secretary of State, was very supportive, as is Matt Hancock, and we know the armed forces are, and this is the quote from Lieutenant General Martin Bricknell, who was the previous Surgeon General. So we know that we've linked in with everybody, MOD as well, DH, the Armed Forces Company, NHS employers, the Step Into Health, to bring everybody together to actually provide a combined offer for our patients and our veterans. Next one, please. So our first meeting was in 2017, and when I went there, I thought, well, what do Armed Forces personnel like? Well, they love maps. So I put it all on a map, and I think that was really important. The only thing I didn't have was a compass. So we met in 2017. We had a further meeting in 2018, and we've steadily increased the number of trusts that we've accredited to. So currently we're at 63, and I think we've just accredited another 2, taking us up to 65, which I have to say is fantastic. And it also includes mental health trusts, and it also includes ambulance trusts. So I'm very excited that they are all wanting to join, and we have manifestos for each of the different types of trust which they sign up to deliver this. Next slide, please. The other big thing is we now have these. We've got the 7 regional VCH leads. I work very closely with Alison Beale, who's my chief of staff really, but has taken on the management role of this, and it is going great guns, as you can see there. And I have great confidence that this team, of which 4 of them are veterans and 3 are not, are really going to deliver for us. And the aim is to get every trust, whether it be mental health, ambulance or NHS trust, signed up to the up to the VCHA, certainly by the end of November 2022. Next slide, please. So what's the latest news? So the regional leads are focusing on the trust in their regions. We want to secure accreditation for all acute community mental health trusts, and we will provide the support throughout the process. So we just don't leave you to do it on your own. We will help you. It's not for individual cases, and it's actively engaged with other veteran services and third sector, which I think is very important as we try to join it all up. Next slide, please. The other big bee in my bonnet that I've had for a number of years is what we do about rehabilitation. I was always very aware of what the excellent world-class rehabilitation went on at Headley Court. Well, the good news is we're about to build the first veterans rehabilitation unit at my hospital at the ROH. It starts in May, June, I hope, of this year, where we will review and identify the best rehabilitation, which will cascade into the wider NHS. And the good news is, again, we received money from the centre, and we appointed Maisie Proven, who's a physiotherapist and has now been is now in the reserves and has been ordered captain. And we also have Sarah Barkin OT. Over 2 years, we're going to define what is the best practice, and then we're going to trial it in this new rehabilitation centre so that we can then cascade it out into the wider NHS. And what I see is that this veterans rehab unit will be the first one of a number around the country where veterans will be able to access the fact of world-class care, which then other NHS patients will also be able to do. So I'm very excited about that. Next slide. So that's a brief overview of where we've come from, where we're going, where we are. And I think with the appointment of our 7 new regional leads like Guy, it's given us a real impetus. And I have the greatest confidence that we are going to be able to have a significant impact on the care of veterans and all NHS patients over the next few years. Thanks, Guy.
Great, thanks very much, boss. And bang on 10 minutes, by the way. Next slide, please. Finally, I really want to introduce Coventry and Warwickshire NHS Partnerships Trust, who will deliver the journey to VCHA accreditation, and maybe more importantly, the lived experience of the patient. Dr. Dan Barnard qualified as a Doctor of Clinical Psychology at Oxford in 2003. And since then, he has concentrated on developing his clinical expertise with adults with mental health difficulties and specialised in the treatment of complex post-traumatic stress disorder and psychological care. He has worked to trailblaze wider improvements and influence in NHS mental health care of military veterans, and is now a clinical lead for one of the recently established veterans mental health services in England. Dan is also currently the lead psychologist for adult mental health in Coventry and Warwickshire Partnership NHS Trust. Both Lynn and Nick Caswell, who will be helping him, are veterans. I couldn't do their story justice, so I'll leave it over to them. Dan, over to you. Next slide, please, Carl.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much. Generous introduction, dignified guests, and it's a privilege to be here. I'll just ask Lynn to flash on the camera. Lynn, say hello. There we go. There's Lynn.
Morning.
Morning. So Lynn and I have worked on this. I just wanted to quickly say a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm ex-Navy. I did 12 years, started as a chef and then branch changed over to be a mental health nurse. Joined the NHS in 2010, working with CWPT veterans, starting as just me. And now, as you'll see, our journey going forward, we've grown and grown and grown.
Thank you. And Nick, you want to just say hello? We'll come back to you in a bit, but say hello, please.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you. So, right, yes, our journey from 2011 to 2021, really, obviously there's too much to cover, but we sort of took the form of maybe thinking about what we've built as a structure and what are some of the building blocks to get us there. Fantastic presentation from Professor Briggs. It's great to see sort of what was behind the scenes to what we were trying to achieve here. Next slide, please. So, okay, right. Try and make sense of that for you. So, first of all, what did we do? Well, we've believed strongly that actually mainstream care for veterans, people who've served. So I'm a civvy, you probably spotted that, although I have a big leaning towards the armed forces for family reasons. But we believe and are convicted that actually to get the scale that is required, we need to work through the mainstream. There are fantastic charities out there, as we'll cover, but actually that's a very important point. It's not all about going off and veterans seeing veterans only. We have to upskill our very skilled NHS clinicians. So that's fundamental. The signpost there, the U-turn thing, is more about signposting. Signposting shouldn't be a dirty word, but we learned it actually often is for veterans, particularly with mental health problems. And our trust, Coventry and Warwickshire Partnership Trust, is a mental health and learning disabilities trust. And that's the bit that particularly we're talking about here. I will say at this point, the vast majority of people who serve have excellent mental health. They are there is also a significant minority who struggle more, as Professor Briggs pointed out. But signposting, we think, needs to be warm hands on, warm hands off. Don't just fob off. Actually, when you see somebody, you say a veteran, you don't just simply give them the name of a charity. You actually have to hold on to them and ease them through to the next stage. So that's another fundamental building block for us. Signing the Forces Covenant is an easy one to say because we're talking all about that today. Commitment has been mentioned here. There's so many competing different reasons for taking our time. We have to have a real focus on armed forces. You've got to have people in your trusts who are devoted to that particular cause. The wig there is not about enlisting a judge. It's a big wig, get it? So actually we have to have the leads in the trusts where you start certainly involved in this. And today we've got Sonia Gardner, our Chief Operating Officer, who works to Mel Coombs, our existing Chief Exec now. Our previous Chief Exec is on the call as well. Simon Gilby, our Chair, Jagta Singh, have always helped this. They've given us the top cover that we need. Next slide, please. So what do you do next? What do you actually do to improve your services? Well, you've got to know where your veterans are. So you've got people piling into referrals, piling into mental health trusts all the time, 100 a day sometimes are coming in. If you don't ask whether they've served or not, then how are you going to know? So that's the first thing. Sounds basic, but have you ever been a member of the British Armed Forces, or are you dependent of one? And if that person says yes, then obviously, talking to the NHS people there, your clinical systems need to have a facility to flag that. It needs to mean something. So there's a lot of very good intention in this area. And our challenge to ourselves, but to you all as well, is it's got to actually matter on the ground. The Forces Covenant, to make sense, has to change the route that the patient takes. Not take it over and push away all the care that they should get anyway, just as a member of the community. But how can we enhance that care? And what we showed was, by clocking those people coming through, that if we had one person in the trust responsible, we call them a Veterans Pathway Manager, and the CCGs, our commissioners locally, funded that person. We showed that that route can be significantly enhanced. And I'll hand over to Lynn and for the next slide, please, to give you some examples of how we enhance that pathway.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So how we started was we put a comms out across the trust to find out if any of our staff were interested in working with this particular group of veterans and whether they wanted to be a veterans champion. And we had a number of people come forward. Some were veterans themselves, some family members, or just some had got an interest in working with this particular group of people. So we brought those people together, and we also targeted to make sure that we've got these veterans champions in different services across the trust and also different localities. So they weren't all grouped in one particular team. We've got them spread out across the trust, various localities, various services. We also looked at a different range of disciplines because we felt that this would help us too. So we've got consultant psychiatrists as the champions, we've got psychologists, we've also got social workers, healthcare support workers, social workers and nurses. So we've got a range of staff that help us with our Veterans Champion network. So for these Veterans Champions, we've offered them training and support. We've done that through NHS England, who've got an e-learning package for working with the military community. But we also work very closely with Coventry and Warwickshire and Solihull local authority, AFCC group, and they've developed an excellent e-learning package. So we promote that as well to our champions as a way of keeping up to date with what's going on in the military community. We also use the NHS England accredited York St John University military human training, and I know Nick Wood is around today, and he's been brilliant and an imperative part of knowledge, giving our staff really the knowledge and tools that they need to work with this group of people. So he's been brilliant, and a shout out to Nick for that. So what it means is that when these veterans come into the trust and they come into a particular service, we will link them up with one of those veterans champions to ensure that the covenant is being adhered to really. Examples of that means it may be, as we're a mental health trust, that we need to look at the psychology waiting list. Does that person need to be prioritised because of their military service? Another example is that one of our veterans champions is an occupational therapist. So we linked her in with a veteran who was struggling with his PTSD symptoms at work, and she went along, spoke to the employers, and we put a support package in place there, and he's still in his job when he was at, they were quite happy to get rid of him. What else have we got? We also link them in with the relevant charities that we work with. Veterans come to us with mental health problems, but it can also be debt, finance, housing, relationships. So we work with the large charities, we work with the Veterans Contact Point, which is an excellent smaller charity in our local area, and they've been brilliant. We couldn't do that without them. So that's about our Veterans Champions. So we provide the training, we involve them in everything we do. But the main people who are who've helped us get where we are today really is our service users. Next slide, please. So there's just some pictures there. Our service users, we find with veterans, as with other groups of society, but veterans especially, once they've come through our services and have had the help that they need, they want to give back. They want to, whether it's just saying, bringing somebody else into the service who needs a bit of support and saying, these guys are all right, give them a go, or we keep hold of them, like lovely Nick, and they help with presentations, conferences, you know, to tell their story. And that's the best that we can offer, really, is having guys like Nick on board. They help us on recruitment panels. They join us when we do staff recruitment. We always have one of our guys or girls on the panel to give their advice and experience. What else do they do? They help us with events for Armed Forces Day. We all come together with sort of community events. One of the big things that our service user forums help us with is the co-production. They're involved with the design and planning and bid writing of our new services. So when we started as CWPT, and then we looked at going for the NHS England TILS, Transition, Intervention and Liaison Service, those guys were involved with that as well, telling us what would work, what wouldn't work, and giving their expertise and opinion. They're also great at Christmas parties. They like to party hard, so we tend to get them out on nights out as well. And it's just they're just brilliant. We can't say how brilliant they are. They have won several awards of their own through our CWPT Quality Awards, which is a trust award annual event. They've won Service User Forum of the Year. We've had an individual volunteer of the award, and the mental health team veterans themselves received the Chief Exec Award of the Year. But obviously our VCHA accreditation is the one that we're here to talk about today. So I'll hand back to Dan.
Thank you very much, Lynn. So we should start showing off about all the awards.
Sorry about that, I can't help it.
Next slide, please. Thank you very much. Okay, I'll do this one a bit quicker because we are running over a little bit, but it's brilliant to just give you a bit more detail and the realism behind it. But the other very important thing, once you get to a certain level of veteran awareness and it's working quite well within the trust you're in, then it's about spreading the tentacles, isn't it? It's about growing out into the system, as we talk about all the time now. And obviously the NHS people on the call will know about integrated care systems. Well, before that acronym had appeared, ICS, in the veteran sphere, we'd noticed straight away that everybody's got a piece of the jigsaw, as the little picture denotes. Getting into the Joint Strategic Needs Authority, getting the veterans' needs recognised in there is crucial. Working with smaller but very important charities like the VCP has been absolutely integral to our credibility with veterans on the ground. Other NHS trusts as well, lowering competition boundaries that might be there and actually working with our partners. And what we've gone on to achieve is very much now about a much bigger thing than just CWPT. Working with the police absolutely has been so important about making those links in through criminal justice. The bigger charities as well, the SAFAs and others, there's far too many to name check, but you've got the big ones, Combat Stress and British Legion and the Help for Heroes, but many others as well. The smaller charities I've mentioned. I just flagged there the university, Warwick and Coventry, but the point being, actually evaluate the stuff that you're doing and do it robustly as well, because that's been a crucial building block for us, that it allows us to just go that extra level if you can demonstrate empirical credibility. Next slide, please. And so where it's built into now, Lynn mentioned Transition, Intervention, Liaison Service, Complex Treatment Service, and now High Intensity Service. I'm going to show you an animation in just one moment to depict where we've got to now. But if you can see down the bottom, Lincoln, Birmingham, there's Mental Health Matters, Walking with the Wounded, and Tom Harrison House and Warwick University. We form a provider collaborative now. We've grown into that using all the building blocks that I've described. And now, yes, we are one of these, as has been recently badged, Op Courage services. And we've now collectively across the Midlands and East area have actually seen 4,000 veterans through that service. And we're extremely proud of being able to do that. It's not perfect, but it's way better than it was, and we're still improving. So if we could show that animation, and that should it should play and it should be self-explanatory.
Many veterans of the UK Armed Forces currently receive NHS mental health care through TILS, a Transition, Intervention and Liaison Service, and CTS, a Complex Treatment Service. A small percentage of veterans' difficulties become so acute that there's a need for a more urgent response and resolution. The Midlands High Intensity Service is designed to address just this, working in conjunction with tills, and CTS. So in an urgent situation, how do these pieces of the jigsaw fit together? Nick is a veteran with complex post-traumatic stress disorder and alcohol misuse. After a military-sensitive assessment with tills, Nick takes up treatment with a local mental health team psychiatrist, alongside therapy by CTS. But late one night, Nick reaches a crisis point in his relationship. He's drinking a lot of alcohol and threatening violence and suicide. In desperation, Nick's partner dials 999. To protect both their safety, the police remand Nick in custody until the alcohol leaves his system and a plan can be put in place. What happens next? This is how things could go now. The next morning, no interest is shown in Nick's veteran status, and no link is made with the CTS team currently treating him. Nick convinces everyone that he feels not only embarrassed, but also much better, and he's sent home. Nick makes an attempt on his life shortly afterwards. Now let's run that again. How can things go with the high-intensity service in place? As well as calling the police, Nick's partner contacts the high-intensity service. Their support and specialist knowledge is reassuring, and agreement is reached that the service will visit the police station the next morning when Nick is sober. A high-intensity service clinician assesses Nick, making full allowance for his veteran status. Understanding of Nick's unique circumstances is at the heart of the meeting. Nick is engaged. He's also not being lost between poorly joined up services. The crisis is de-escalated. An improved risk plan involving both Nick and his partner is drawn up and shared with CTS, tills, and his psychiatrist. The GP is fully updated. The Midlands High Intensity Service follows up, working with Nick and, crucially, his partner and agreed family members on the factors that contributed to the crisis. They also show how the service can continue to help Nick in the future if he needs it. Nick and his partner prefer Scenario 2. We prefer Scenario 2. With hubs in Birmingham, Coventry and Lincoln, the Midlands High Intensity Service will provide wraparound care, bringing a new continuity to improve the mental health care of UK Armed Forces veterans.
Thank you. And the next slide, please. Okay, so the only person that's overrun today, you'll have detected this straight away, is a civilian. Sorry, I'm trying my hardest, but I'll go fast. But this is really important, this bit. Nick in the video is not Nick here. We just have a namesake thing, although there was a bit of a nod to Nick has been involved with our services right since the beginning. And so although we have lots of other service users, credit where credit's due, Nick. And these are some of the deployments that Nick did. But if I hand over to you now, Nick.
Thank you, Dan. I hope everybody can hear me. I've been kindly invited to give a bit of an overview as to my history and where I am now. So I joined the Armed Forces back in the early 90s, the regulars and reserves. As you can see there, I've done numerous amount of tours. I was in the Royal Corps Signals, in the training side of things. Not only for the trade training, but also preparation for guys on tours and also the recruitment side of things. I was diagnosed with PTSD shortly after coming back from Afghanistan and found things quite difficult in life, especially going home and people asking questions about things, and things started going from the worst, but I didn't really see what was going on apart from my family and friends, and it started deteriorating. I went to try and find the help and the support that I wanted, but it's like with a small majority of people, is that you're far too proud to admit there's a problem. In the forces, you're taught to, carry on and all that type of thing. And my fear was
Am I going to lose my friendship? Is it going to affect my promotion, my career path, etc.? Unfortunately, I did get an honourable discharge, medical discharge, gutted to say the least, but I knew I had to dust myself off and get that help and that support. Throughout the NHS, I noticed that there was a service going on there. Dan Barnard, Dr. Dan Barnard, was the person that helped me. First thing that I said to Dan was, you haven't got a clue, you haven't got an understanding, you don't know my background, you've not been there, you've not got that lived experience. I suppose really that was down to my ignorance at the time, but I suddenly kind of like got used to the fact that I needed the help, and Dan was there to give me that support and give me certain coping strategies to go forward in my life. After that help, I wanted to do something and do something in a positive way, thinking, well, if I can do it, other people can do it. So since then, I've got myself up. I've got coping strategies, etc. And what I've been doing since for the last 7 years now is helping other veterans. It's giving them the peer-to-peer support, but it's also continuing that help and support that they need, and actually seeing their journey and going forwards, not going backwards or standing still. Now, myself, I had more than one problem with PTSD, and also my suicidal tendencies, trying to take my life several times. And you probably will see that on a lot of veterans, is that they have probably more than one problem. But it's being able to help them in the correct manner and the correct way. And what we do within Veterans Contact Points that I work with, and also North Warwickshire Council, is to put plans into place, give them a bit of a routine, something to get up for in the morning, and helping them steer in the right direction rather than going backwards. I've been with VCP now for nearly 4 years now. I've had 2 projects. One was successful, and North Warwickshire Borough Council have now employed me as the Veterans Housing and Support Project Officer. It's helping those veterans that are struggling somewhat, homelessness, mental health, drugs and alcohol, that type of thing. And I'm there to give them that support, give them a bit of hope, give them a bit of a direction that, you know, yeah, you've got yourself in a bad place, but let's put some plans into place to go forward in your life. And what I'm trying to do and trying to say is that is what I was missing with regards to when I got medical discharge with the NHS. Dan himself and Lynn gave me a plan to go forward. And talking about it is probably a lot better than what keeping it inside yourself. And that's what I try and do with a lot of our veterans that do struggle. VCP itself and the NHS TILs and other associations, local authorities, we continue to go forward and honour the sacrifice that our armed forces community have made, our veterans and service leavers, in going forwards. NHS TILs, when I first got the help, was kind of like at the beginning of things going to get better. And with my help, I hope that, you know, Dan will agree with me as being a speaker, and also telling my story to doctorates with Dan Barnard. It's given not only the professionals, but also our veterans a clear and clarity as to, you know, how we can go forward, and also sharing with other organisations and not keeping it as a separate entity. I'm a firm believer sharing what we do with other organisations and charities, and let them go forward in their life. So that's it for myself. And thank you very much indeed for having me on here.
Thank you so much, Nick. Brilliant. Just the next slide just says thank you to everybody for listening. But Nick, absolutely brilliant. It is a privilege watching somebody get from where you were to where you've come, and I hope that the building blocks that we've talked about, crucially this one being about involving people meaningfully who have served in helping the credibility of what you're doing in your trusts. I hope that was really particularly landed, and that animation was built entirely with service users. We did that specifically, we co-produced that. So I hope that has been a useful presentation for you, and my apologies for overrunning.
Great. Dan, Lynn, Nick, thank you very much. What a great journey, what a great story, and still lots to do actually. So I'm quite clear that VCHA has got to be the way forward for every trust, you know, without a doubt. Next slide, please. That really concludes all the presentations. I'd just now quickly like to mention 2 trusts that have been recently VCHA accredited. Next slide, Carl. This slide really shows West Midlands Ambulance Trust and indeed Nottingham University Hospital Trust. And they recently signed up to VCHA, were accredited. Professor Tim Briggs, who chairs that steering group, approved that as all the other members. So, you know, many congratulations really to both chief execs of them organisations for leaning in. And of course, in terms of Nottingham, you know, Amanda Blackshaw and Nicole Dixon, who did a sterling job getting this across the line. And indeed, with West Midlands Ambulance Trust, Kim Nurse, who I know it's her last day, not online today, but I know Marie Watson is. Marie, please pass my regards and best wishes to Kim for a fantastic job. So, no, great news, and let's hope we get a lot more in this region. We are currently sat 52 trusts in the Midlands, of which now 13 have signed up, but more of that later. Next slide, please. I'd now really like to draw it to a close and hand over to the Deputy Lieutenant for West Midlands for the closing address. Sylvia.
Thank you, Guy. In bringing this excellent Armed Forces Covenant and Veterans Covenant Healthcare Alliance webinar to a close, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank all the speakers today for a fabulous overview of their roles and journeys. It's always invidious to single out individuals, but I wanted to say a heartfelt thank you, especially to Professor Tim Briggs, and indeed everyone who has worked tirelessly over the years to improve the healthcare of our military community. I also wanted to say how inspired I was by Nick Caswell, our veteran, who offered an insight into his patient's journey with the understanding support from Dr. Dan Barnard and the team at Coventry and Warwickshire Partnership NHS Trust. That was all very interesting and a good insight in where we have to go. It will not have escaped the majority of you that the further incorporation of the Armed Forces Covenant into law in the Armed Forces Bill is welcomed and should be supported across the nation. The Covenant is certainly a force for good, as is the Veterans Covenant Healthcare Alliance. Where our military has supported us, it's only fair and right that we now support them. But at its core, that is what the Armed Forces Bill does. However, care needs to be taken that the Covenant process and indeed VCHA accreditation does not just become another box-ticking exercise. I'm proud to say that this is not the case here in the Midlands. Of course, most of this work is, as it should be, largely focused on the veterans and service families. However, in recent months, my thoughts have increasingly been turning towards our support for the serving servicemen and women. The last 12 months have been difficult for all of us. The public upwelling of sympathy for and support of frontline healthcare workers has been some comfort and encouragement for them. But behind the scenes, thousands of our military personnel have been hugely involved around the country too. All their training is geared towards coping with crisis, persevering through adversity and never admitting defeat. Their professionalism, whether in planning, logistics, in transport, and of course, in all the healthcare roles, is second to none. Their drive and initiative, enthusiasm and endeavour, not to mention their courtesy and compassion, have been repeatedly remarked on by members of the public. Less visible, but no less important, are the sailors, soldiers and airmen and women who continue to defend our country and our way of life at home, at sea and in coalition operations overseas. They have had greater periods of separation as they isolate pre-deployment and greater anxiety as they are separated from their loved ones and unable to help with homeschooling or caring. To all our military community and NHS staff, I pay tribute and thank you all for your service. Now, my second challenge to you all today is to ensure that the Midlands is the first region to have all our trusts signed up to the Armed Forces Covenant and the Veteran Covenant Healthcare Alliance accredited by the 11th of November 2020. So there's no pressure there, folks. Finally, a very big thank you to Guy for putting this very wonderful event together. Thank you, Guy.
Great, thank you very much, DL. Some inspiring words there. Next slide, please. Being ex-military, I couldn't help but put some outcomes on the webinar. 3 outcomes. So if you're not signed up to the Armed Forces Covenant, please have a look. You're encouraged to sign up, speak to Bobby Birdie. Those in the Midlands who are not Veterans Covenant Healthcare Alliance accredited, again, please email me and together we can get through the process. And finally, mentoring, really important. As I said, we've got 13 trusts accredited now in the Midlands. Dan Barnard has offered to mentor trusts within the region. We'll share them out, but they are the 3 key takeaways. Finally, I'd just like to thank all the speakers who I thought did a fantastic job, very informative and very clear. A personal thank you to the Deputy Lieutenant who has really helped me over the last 2 months get across the networks. So on that note, I'd like to thank everyone so very much for taking the time out to listen to the webinar. Please stay safe. You know the contact numbers. I'd appreciate you establishing communications as soon as possible. Thank you very much. Questions will be answered, and of course this has been recorded. Thank you all.